Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Authenticity, Transforming Workplace Culture. My name's Simon Thiessen, and with me today I've got my co-host, Kirralea Walkerton. Welcome, Kirralea.
Hi, listeners. Thanks, Simon. Great to be here.
Good to have you here. So today we're launching a new format for the podcast. We've enjoyed the format we've used so far, but we're just going to make a few tweaks based on some suggestions from listeners. What we're going to do is we've got 3 regular features we'll have at the beginning of each episode. Then we'll hear from a guest, and we'll finish up with you and I unpacking some of what we heard from the guest and a listener question or two if we have time. Ready to get into it?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
So, Kirralea, which of the features would you like to start with first?
I think we'll start with the good, the bad, and the what the, which was an idea that we came up with that we could incorporate anything that we have either read or we've heard or something that we've spoken to someone about, and that would address something good in leadership, something not so good in leadership, and then something that is just what the. And the what that can, and the what that doesn't necessarily have to be out there crazy. The what that can be something that really made us think long fantastic. Or think deeply, or it can be something that was just completely what the. But we just thought it would be a good opportunity to just have some different topics each week that we can discuss.
It could focus on leadership, it could focus on workplace culture, it could focus on teams. So any of the usual things we talk about in this podcast. So what's the good this week?
Okay, so the good is a video, and I will link it to the episode notes, but it was a video that was on ABC News, and it was published on Sunday the 3rd of April, and it was How Do Children Describe a Leader? So this was an Australian first research project at an art exhibition which asked hundreds of Melbourne children to draw and describe what a leader looks like to them. And from there, they used the pictures and the information in the art display, but they've also gone a step further, and they've actually analysed and used it as a research project, the feedback and the answers that they were given. And I thought it was really interesting because we're going right back to kids that start at the age of 4 years old.
Yeah.
And it just, as I read it, it just is so similar to what we then try to sometimes have to reteach adults as they enter their leadership journey. And it really left me with the question with, where in between when you're your 4 to 11-year-old self to your journey to become a leader, do we lose so much of this in between? So I'll just summarize what they pulled out from the research project. So at kinder, which is ages 4 to 5, the children draw themselves as the leader, so that themselves as a child as the leader, more than any other group. And their picture of a leader is winning a race, or they're the head of the line, or they're the first in line, or they're the class leader for that week. So that's how they view a leader. By the time they get to 6 to 7 years, they normally draw an adult, and they concentrate on the functional sides of the leader. So getting a task done, or decision making, what to do, or knowing what to do in certain circumstances. And it's very much the socio-emotional side of a leader. So how it's starting to go towards that socio-emotional side of how do they make people feel. By the age of 8 and 9, it's absolutely socio-emotional side of the leader. So how does the leader make other people feel? Is the leader mean, or is the leader nice in the decisions they make and how they do it, and how the leader influence the feelings of the followers, being the other kids? So how, when they make their decisions, how do they make everyone else feel? So it's that real emotional awareness side of leadership. By the age of 10 to 11, there's a lot of interest in the humanitarian dimension of leaders, so what the leaders do for society and what kind of impact they're starting to have on other people in their decisions and the way that they lead.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting, that,
That's
as they, just the different way that, and as they shift more, and that real emotional awareness and that emotional intelligence side of how they view a leader is just what so many leaders lack when they get to their formal leadership journey.
That's fantastic.
Another interesting fact was that boys, 98% of the boys drew a male leader, and the 2% that drew a female leader was almost 100% the queen that they saw as a leader. The girls, 70% drew a female leader, and that was from prep to grade 5. By grade 6, this dropped back to 40% of drawing a female leader. So it still shows that there's just that bias between the gender roles. And finally, the key qualities. So they asked them to draw them, but they also asked them what the key qualities were. And what completely overrided all the key qualities were the sensitive characteristics of being helpful and kind, is what they felt that a real leader is. And I think that, in the words of children, that really just articulates, if you can be a helpful and kind leader as an adult in your leadership journey, that's half your battle into what kind of leader is going to be a successful one.
In fact, if you can be a helpful and kind person, you probably are a leader.
That's exactly right. Absolutely.
That's awesome. I love the fact that those younger children drew themselves, and if we could just keep that for people as they grew older, to keep seeing themselves as a leader, because if we see ourselves as one, we behave like one. But it's interesting then that they immediately start looking at that functional and formal power-based leadership. Evolve. What I'd love to know is in 10, 15, 20 years, what sort of leaders these children become. Because I don't know if I as a child or you as a child would have had the same sorts of insights, because potentially the social context wasn't the same.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, I did think that was the thought that I had the same as you, is that they see themselves as a leader, and that's it. It's the first step to anyone's leadership journey, is seeing themselves as a leader. So I thought that was very, very interesting.
Now, you could have almost done the bad there as well, because that gender imbalance is really concerning. 98% of boys drew a male and 2% drew the queen.
I know. It is really, it's that unconscious bias, isn't it, that we just have?
It's phenomenal. And for the female leader they think of to be the queen is a bit sad, because there's so many other great female leaders that they could think of first. But it's
also sad that it drops off, from prep to grade 5 and then to grade 6. That's a 30% decrease in the way people view male to female leaders.
Was that in the way girls viewed?
Yeah, that was the way the girls drew the leaders. They drew leaders to be male. Once they
So the social norms are still so strong that that even the girls themselves are starting to be persuaded that a leader looks like a man. So obviously work to do, but that wasn't our bad. What is the bad?
Well, the bad is actually a conversation I had with someone the other day, and I think this just highlights a less than desirable element of management and leadership. I was having a conversation with someone last week, and they said to me that when they are giving feedback or when they're trying to have a conversation with their manager, they basically are told by the manager they don't care until it is an actual problem that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
And for me, that just kept ringing in my head after that conversation. It was a lengthy conversation that I had with someone, but I just kept thinking, my manager just doesn't care until it's an actual problem. And I thought, oh, gee, it happens all the time. And I just thought that was articulated really well, because that is exactly what happens. We can see problems or potential, but often we shy away from, and I say we as in people on their management and leadership journey, they shy away from them because they're too hard, or will worry about it later, or
it's too much else to do.
There's too much else to do. Yeah. I'm too busy. I can't handle that as well. That's not a problem yet. That's underneath the surface. We don't need to worry about that until it bubbles over. But I think it's that whole understanding of it's going to bubble over, and the tension that's underneath the surface is impacting far more. By the time it does bubble over, you actually don't realise the damage that has been done. And so I guess for me it was really, how can we get leaders to see the value in addressing these problems before they're problems.
Absolutely. I can hear my grandmother's words. She was quite a formidable lady, and I was a bit in awe of her as a child, and I can hear her looking at me saying, "A stitch in time."
Yes.
And that's what happens here. And some of these scenarios just end up so messy to deal with. So another good one. Thank you, Kirralea. I'm going to jump in with the what the, if I may. And this one, it's a really sad one for me. And it was something that happened. It really made me reflect um, over the last week. A podcaster that I'm a big cycling fan. There's the most listened to podcast on cycling in the world is called the Cycling Podcast. Three quite quirky individuals, a lot of fun, and one of them died very young, unexpectedly, and the leader of the group. And it really a few things really struck me. The the way he had impacted that team was really clear in listening to their language as they talked about what had happened. But the other thing that really struck me, and I felt it quite personally because I felt like I knew this guy. And what struck me out of that is this sense of loss that I had for someone I'd never met, but I felt like I knew. And I actually said to you, Kirralea, that I felt like if I walked into a pub and saw him there, his name was Richard Moore. If I saw him there, I could bowl up and say, "G'day, Richard," and have a beer with him because I felt I knew him that well. Yet at the same time, he could probably look back at me and think, "Who the heck are you?" Now, from my understanding of him, he's such a lovely man that he probably wouldn't have done that. But it really struck me, that disparity, that I could know him so well, or felt that I knew him so well, almost to the sense that he was a friend, yet he wouldn't know I existed. And it told me something about the power of a human being to connect with other people and the medium of podcasting. And what it's inspired me to do is I would love to think that we could even go close to replicating that the people who listen to us could get a sense of connecting with us. And just for the record, if you do see me in a bar, I'm completely okay if you want to bowl up and say, "Hi, Simon, can I buy you a beer?" That's going to be fine with me. So it's a sad one, but
It is.
there were some really strong lessons for me in it from both a leadership perspective and a podcasting perspective.
I think as someone that listens to a lot of podcasts as well, and when you spoke to me about that last week when it happened, I think that when you listen to a podcast so much, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a podcast, it can be people you follow on social media or something like that, but when they are their authentic self and they really lean in to vulnerability, I think that's where you just really find that connection. And even though there's no actual connection because you don't know them and you've never met them, when they open themselves up and allow that human side of them and allow that vulnerable side to show, I think we feel like they're one of us, and we feel like we're friends, and we feel like we're sitting there listening to a conversation. And a similar thing happened. It's a long story, but a similar thing happened the other day. There was on a podcast that I religiously listen to every week. There was an April Fool's joke played that was a really innocent April Fool's joke. She joked about being pregnant, and it was taken out of context, and I can understand why, because I don't agree with those kind of jokes personally, because I've got some friends that have had really long and sad battles with trying to fall pregnant and battles with their journey to having a baby. But I think the reason why people were so shocked by it was because they feel like she's their friend and she wouldn't do that to hurt someone. Why would she do that? That could be that could be taken like that. And whilst she was absolutely devastated that it was taken like that and openly held herself accountable to it and said, "This will not happen," this should not have happened, sorry. I think that the reaction from people was for that reason, because they do feel so close to her and they feel like they know her, and you almost go, that's not something that they would do because you feel that you know them so well. And I think that's right. And I think it's a real credit to people that they allow you. And, she has been incredibly vulnerable about parts of her life, like she's had a marriage breakdown and, things have been really tough. And I think, when people are brave enough to be that open and vulnerable about their personal life, and good things happen. And that's what we say to our leaders, is that when you lean into vulnerability, good things happen for you, good things happen on your leadership journey, and good things happen for your team when they see that. So
and people connect with you. I think that's great. Yeah. And look, I listen to one or two other cycling podcasts every now and then. And to be honest, they're a bit macho and they're not authentic. And I think you've nailed it, that because they're their authentic selves, that's where that connection comes from. So that's good. I've enjoyed that. As sad as that last example is, I've enjoyed that particular feature. So let's move into the second feature. And this one here, we've had a long discussion about what this one should be called. And I know that, Kirralea, you're not in love with this title, and I'm not either. So we're going to encourage our listeners to suggest some titles for this segment. I'm calling it Words of Wisdom to start with. And what we're going to share with you each episode is a leadership quote. What I love about quotes is they can be really simple ways to package information, to package inspiration. They can also just be really quick, simple reminders that can help ground us in great principles. And this is a beautiful quote by a philosopher called Henry David Thoreau. And I had the privilege recently we sponsored and gave a leadership award at a sporting club, a kids' sporting club, to some of the older kids who'd shown leadership. And this is when they asked what the criteria to judge that should be, I gave them this quote and said, find someone who does this. The challenge of leadership is to be strong but not rude, be kind but not weak, be bold but not bully, be thoughtful but not lazy, be humble but not timid, be proud but not arrogant, have humour but without folly. And what I love about that is it does describe that line that leaders need to walk. It's a difficult balance to find, which is why concepts around leadership might be simple, but it's not necessarily easy to find that balance. Being someone who cares about and encourages and supports other people while also holding people accountable, that's a tough balance. So that's the words of wisdom for this week, and it might be the last words of wisdom, because I hope by next episode we have a better title.
Yes, I completely agree. I like the concept. I just think the name's a little cliche at the moment.
So I'm going to throw to you now, because you've got the with our third area, or our third feature, we've called Worth the Time. So this is some sort of resource. It might be a movie, a television show, a book, some sort of YouTube video, a TED Talk, something we've come across that we think is really worth the time, investing the time in absorbing. And you've got something that you've shared with me a couple of times and that I haven't yet managed to access. Tell our listeners about that.
No, and we've actually had a few of our clients that we've worked with that have come back to us as well, and some podcast listeners that have come back to us as well, saying that they've really enjoyed it as well. So it is a television series that has been brought out by Apple TV, and it's called Ted Lasso. So there's 2 series that's available on Apple TV, and they're actually filming a third at the moment. So the series follows Ted Lasso, who is an American football coach who is hired to coach an English soccer team in an attempt by the soccer team's owner to spite her ex-husband. So Ted is completely inexperienced in soccer, but the journey that he takes you on, it's not long before you absolutely love him for who he is. And I think if I could summarize what it was about, you don't even have to love soccer to love who Ted is. His commitment to treating others with dignity and respect and doing what he thinks is the right thing even when no one is watching him, transforms many people around him into better human beings, because he's able to connect with others and inspire them to find the best in themselves, which is ultimately what our goal is as leaders and what the leader we want to be in our team.
Yeah.
And I was thinking why workplaces need more Ted Lasso leaders. And I've come up with that great leaders are willing to be vulnerable. Great leaders are okay with being the bad guy because they understand they're not there to be friends with everyone first. Courageous leadership earns trust, and great leaders focus on others' intentions, not their own actions alone. And
Fantastic.
for anyone wondering the type of person Ted Lasso is in his leadership style, one of my favourite Ted Lasso sayings from the series is, taking on a challenge is a lot like riding a horse, isn't it? If you're comfortable while you're doing it, you're probably doing it wrong.
So always challenging people to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah, and be okay with being uncomfortable. Be okay with, leaning into that uncomfortability.
Excellent. And look, I am going to, you are so passionate about it, and I trust your judgment so much that I have to, I'm going to have to sign up to Apple TV just to see that.
It's so funny. He has this like Southern American accent, and he just says the funniest things at the same time. It's just, I watched it because there was so much hype around it and it had won so many awards in America. And so my husband and I sat down to watch it, and we were both like, this is so good. Like, it's just one of those shows that's just really, really good.
All right. Well,
and you can't help but want to be more like Ted.
So I've enjoyed the new format with those features.
Yeah, it's really good.
Really good conversation. Now, listeners, please don't leave us to flounder around and find words of wisdom and worth the time and the good, the bad, and the what the. And I can't carry that off quite like Kirralea can, but there you go. We want your suggestions. We will include, if you send us something that you think is worth the time, if you send us a quote you love, then we're really happy to feature that in these segments each week. But Kirralea, shall we get on with the introducing our guest?
Definitely.
Fantastic. So our guest this week is someone who is a senior people and culture leader in a not-for-profit organisation. I'll let her tell you a bit about herself as we start the interview. One of the reasons that we're really keen to have someone on with her focus is that she's very passionate about recruitment. And, it was really sparked by a conversation I had with a client this week where we were debating the merits of, are you better off with an empty seat or someone filling a position that's not ideal? And I always fall on the empty seat side of that, unless there's a safety or regulatory issue. So really timely for us to have someone who's a people and culture expert, but with such a passion for recruitment.
So I thought that I would introduce our next guest, given that Simon is actually the husband of our next guest. We would like to welcome Jane Thiessen to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Kirralea. I appreciate you having me in.
Oh, we appreciate you being here. Can you please tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I've been a human resources professional for about 27 years, which sounds like a very long time. I've got a Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Tasmania with a double major in human resource management and information systems. And I guess I've probably had 4 major employers through my career in different industries and sectors, which has been interesting and a great opportunity to learn through each experience.
Absolutely. And what about your current role? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I've just recently joined Hobart City Mission. I'm a Senior Manager, People and Culture there. And it's a really broad role, responsible for pretty much everything that is either employee or volunteer-based. So looking after recruitment, onboarding, training, health and safety, a lot of health and safety infrastructure, so fire extinguishers, first aid kits, all of that type of thing.
Yep.
workers' compensation, reward and recognition, performance management, and then pretty much all of that is mirrored in the volunteer space as well.
Wow.
So it's a big and all-encompassing role, and I guess in a senior HR role, that's sort of what you expect. But something I'm really passionate about is that this is a role that sits on the executive, and I know that hasn't always been the case for you in organisations you've worked with, and even when you were in more junior roles, your managers didn't sit on the executive. And I've always had the opinion that that's really hypocritical when organisations say we're committed to our people and culture, yet people and culture don't have a voice at the most senior level of the organisation. What are your thoughts on that, and how are you finding that difference now that you are in that role and sitting on an executive?
Sure, sure. It's certainly, I think, maybe changing as organisations evolve and grow. Society and workplaces were probably very different 20 years ago, and they were more concerned around profit and didn't understand the impact that having engaged and connected and motivated staff had on making businesses profitable. We're in a very different business environment now. One of my reasons for taking this role was because it does sit on the language that Hobart City Mission uses is senior management team. And that was one of the reasons why I did take this position, was because it was an opportunity to influence at that broader perspective. I also probably need to call out that I'm not here today to talk on behalf of Hobart City Mission. The things that I talk about today, I guess, are from my own personal experience and insights through my career rather than representing the mission.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know you've got a real passion for recruitment. That's, your background has been heavily in a recruitment space. Talk to us about where does that passion come from?
I really see the value in connecting the right people with the right roles in the right organisations and what can be achieved or gained from doing that. You get one of those three steps wrong and you've got a disengaged or dissatisfied either employee or employer. If you get the three right, you get synergy, which is, more than the individual parts standing alone. And I've experienced that myself. When I'm really engaged and connected to a role or in an organisation, I'm more passionate, I'm more committed, I'm more connected, I'm more engaged. And I'm not necessarily going to work, an extra 10 hours a week, but I am going to probably be more productive and more resourceful in the hours that I am at work.
Yeah. So just because that was so important, take us through those three things again.
So it's having the right person in the right role. So that's technical competence. Can they do the actual job? Do they have the skills and the qualifications, the experience to do the job? In the right organisation. So do their values and motivations connect with the organisation's vision and mission and direction?
Yeah.
So the right person, the right role, and the right organisation.
And that's great. It's a great checklist, isn't it, for people out there looking at recruiting people into their organisations. And it actually sort of links to the next question I really want to ask you, which is, how do you go about recruiting people who are just not technically proficient, but also good for the team and culture they'll be joining?
I guess it's firstly you've got to understand the technical competencies required for the role, the technical skills that are required to the role. Break it down to its simplest form. What does the role need to do? What qualifications, what experience, what certificates, what licenses does the role actually need? And once you've got that gives you the foundation, the baseline for the role. But then you need to think about, what sort of interpersonal skills does this role require to be successful? What strengths do they need to bring? What sort of soft skills do they need to bring to this role? And then you look about what does the organisation need? Where has the organisation got gaps? Have we got a lot of this type of skill set or personality or competence and not so much of another? So, by bringing in people with points of difference, are you going to add to the culture or are you going to destabilise the team? Where's that team in the whole evolution of growing?
So, Jane, in that process, how do you make sure that the focus continues through induction?
It needs to continue through the whole employee-employer relationship and management process, the whole life cycle of the employee. So it starts from, I guess, the recruiter getting a good understanding of the role and needing to understand the organisation, either if they're an internal service provider or an external agency working for an organisation. And then through the recruitment process, all the interactions that you have with candidates, that candidate care, it's as simple to put it in a job ad, but is the recruiter demonstrating that in that candidate care experience? Then through the recruitment and onboarding process, again, representing the organisation well in everything that you're doing. So there's no point saying you're a highly flexible organisation that values diversity if when they join the organisation neither of those things are accurate. Be true to what the role is. I've often done a lot of recruiting for regional locations in Tasmania. You need to call it out. It's a difficult place to live. It's a beautiful place to live as well. So you've got to find somebody that actually wants to live and work in that sort of environment. Don't try and gloss over areas that you think might put candidates off. Give them a clear indication of what the environment is that they're going to.
Sorry, carry on.
And then obviously through onboarding, probation, their first year, they'll need to start then connecting and building relationships with their manager or their supervisor in the organisation, and they need to be able to then take over that relationship and build that connection for that employee through that onboarding and engagement journey.
Yeah. And look, before we move on, because there's a question that sort of flows out of that, but if I could go back, you talked about calling it out, which I think is a great point, and calling it out if it's a difficult area to live or a challenging area. What about if they're joining a team that has specific challenges or a culture that might be going through some awkward change?
Definitely. I'd be calling it out once you get past the shortlisting stage. You don't want to call it out too early, but you certainly want to, leading into the interview stage, start talking about, this is the dynamic of the team and this is where the team wants to go. How can you support that? How can you get on board with that? But you've got to be, honest. Is the team really, truly going where you're saying they're going? There's no point saying, it's a really difficult team and there's a bit of internal conflict and we want to fix that. And then the person comes in and says, yes, I want to be part of that solution. And then the organisation isn't committed to fixing that solution.
Yeah.
That person won't stay through probation.
Yep. Great advice. So, and so that actually, you mentioned before about it needs to transition to their direct manager, their line manager. How do you make sure that the focus on being strong culturally and team-wise carries on through that ongoing performance management process, rather than just a manager defaulting to an over-focus on their technical abilities? In other words, how do you keep the line manager focused on acknowledging and giving feedback on the full range of behaviours you'd like to see?
I guess if you look at it from a technical perspective, it depends on all of the metrics that you use in an organisation. So most organisations would have a probationary review process, so the checks that an employee goes through before probation is signed off. In that process, you need to be calling out and celebrating or putting in place corrective action for some of the soft skills. You don't want to just be measuring, can they, bake a cake in the required time or do whatever the technical role of the function of their role is. Can they also run a team leaders meeting? Are they also reporting incidents and accidents? Can they support an employee through a challenging conversation? Measure some of those soft skills during that probation period. And then that also needs to flow through to, I'm assuming most organisations these days would have annual check-ins or annual performance reviews. Those skills need to be recognised, not necessarily called out, but from a negative perspective, but recognised in those discussions as well, as with equal value to the technical competency of the role.
Yep.
Jane, can you talk to us about the role of retention strategies?
It's a challenge in today's environment because employees don't generally stay in an organisation for a long time. If I think back to my father's generation, you stayed in the one organisation for most of your life, if not all of your life. Where if I think of my children's employment, they'll have 15, 20 employers, if not more, through their professional career. So I don't think it's a bad thing for people to leave. Sorry, Kirralea, it's probably not the answer that you want. But I think if you can stay connected with, I guess, your superstars, and particularly if you're an industry that has a niche product or service, then you can stay in touch with them and they might go off, do some great things and then come back and join your organisation, 2, 3, 4 years later. And I think of chefs as a classic example of that. But if you're in an industry where you don't have a niche and you're not going to have returning employees, then you do need to look at ways of putting in retention strategies to maintain staff's engagement and connection as long as possible. And that's things like offering professional development, offering opportunities for them to experience other roles, looking at ways to financially reward people. You could even go as far as having incentives or share options if you're a company that can do that. And making the employment life something that is meaningful or valuable to the employee.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
Be different for different people.
Yeah, opportunities to stretch and take on new challenges to keep them fresh. I guess culture is a really great retention strategy as well, and it's also a great strategy to ensure you have some turnover. So I think in organisations, turnover is inevitable, and what we have to look at is, who are we turning over? Are we keeping the people we want to keep because our culture embraces those people, or are we keeping people? Are we losing people that would be good for the culture and keeping people that maybe hold it back because the culture's not supporting high performance? So,
I was actually just thinking the similar thing to what you said after Jane finished, Simon, in the way where I'm based. We're based in a regional rural area. So for a company like the one my husband works in, it can often be really hard to retain good people, because if you lose them for whatever reason, because of where we're based, it's just really hard to get more people in. And something that they have put a big focus on over the past 24 months is that culture, so that when they are recruiting, they're recruiting the right people that fit, but also the workplace is a culture where people don't want to leave, because you do exactly what you said, Jane. People are offered, more money, they're offered better working conditions, they're offered, bigger roles and things like that. So you can't blame them for taking it. But if your workplace has a culture that they think, they might have this, but they don't have the environment that we're working in, then that often serves well to retain good people.
That's right. And if you've got people that are leaving that you really value, have a conversation with them, find out why they're going, and be creative. If we give you a 2 years leave of absence, would that help you because you want to go and do something in Sydney, for example? But when you have children, we know you want to come back to your rural home. How about you leave for 2 years and come back? Look for opportunities to be creative in the employment relationship. And I mean, that if anything is positive has come out of COVID, that is the opportunity to work flexibly and remotely and in a different. You don't have to be face to face in the office Monday to Friday anymore.
We've proven we can do it. So there's that great old saying that people leave managers, not jobs, and whether it's they leave managers or whether they leave cultures, I think it's we've got to look at that. And if we're losing the people we want to keep, and it was preventable, then we've got to look at that, don't we? So,
and so that's a good point, Simon. So you've got to look at the metrics. So keeping stats on who's leaving and where, and doing good exit surveys will pick up people are leaving a poor manager.
Absolutely. So, look, if you were as a people and culture expert, for those managers listening out there that they may not have the support of a people and culture expert, or they just want to be more informed in their discussions with a people and culture expert, what advice would you give them about recruitment and about the sort of about the strategies they should be using to get people that will take them to the culture they want rather than anchor them in the culture they've already got?
I guess I would encourage them to recruit slowly or spend more time in the recruitment phase. Managers often want to recruit really quickly because the person that they're filling is given notice and they've only got 2 weeks or 4 weeks until they leave. So they rush through the recruitment process and try and have, only a 4-week gap between the new person joining and the previous person leaving. I would say take your time. Look at the position description. Is it an accurate reflection? Work with your recruiter so that she or he truly understands what you're looking for. Have a decent application period so that candidates have got time to consider it and the recruiter's got time to build that relationship with them. Don't rush through it, because once you appoint somebody, you're invested in them. It's much more expensive to exit a person that's been with the organisation and causing chaos for 2 or 3 years than to spend an extra week or two in the recruitment phase and get the person right. That's my big call out, is take your time recruiting and get it right. My second piece of advice would be, if you don't have a people and culture team within your organisation, sign up for web sessions, jump online and read as much as you can. Join networking agencies, whatever it is that you feel that you need to learn. There's people out there and it's all online. You just have to spend the time. And I know that's really difficult because you've got your day job to do as well, but it's investing in your own development.
It'll take a heck of a lot more time to deal with a bad recruitment decision.
That's right.
Look, it was very very consistent with the message earlier when Kirralea and I were chatting, that you're better off to have an empty seat than a poor recruitment choice in almost every instance.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Well, thanks for chatting with us, Jane. It's been really good, an extension of many conversations we've had, and look, a lot of really valuable advice for our listeners there.
You're welcome. Thanks very much. Nice chatting with you.
Well, that was really great to hear from Jane, and I think we can all appreciate now why she is the most insightful and amazing Thiessen in your household.
Kirralea, you and I have worked together for a long time, and I've learnt that when you start anything with that serious look on your face, I've learnt to duck. But in this case, you're both funny and correct. So I can't argue with anything you've said. There's a lot of critical points there, weren't there? That if you want a really strong culture, you've got to start by getting the right people into it. If you're bringing the wrong people in, then that whole cultural journey is going to be very, very difficult.
Absolutely. I think she had so much to share with her passion for recruitment that just really highlights what an important process recruitment is and how vital it is to getting it right.
Yeah. I totally agree. And look, it really did reinforce that whole discussion we had about empty seats versus the wrong person. Finding the best available versus finding the right person is a really critical question. The other thing that really so there were a number of things that really struck me, but one of them was that Jane talked about, you don't sell to a person that, there's some issues in the team and we want to address them and we see you as part of that. And then the person comes in and finds out you actually don't have the appetite to deal with it at all, because they'll leave. And it really reinforced for me that whole sense of culture it's sort of like this. I've got a vision of this fast spinning thing and it attracts things to it, but things that are like it get sucked into the center of it, and things that aren't like that culture get spun out the sides. And I think that happens whether the culture's good or not. So in cultures that are not working well, we get these new people, and the ones who reinforce that poor culture actually get absorbed into it and find a place. And the people who could make a difference end up going, this isn't for me. I think I could go somewhere better, and they get spun out. But the reverse happens, that at great cultures, it's the people who can reinforce that get absorbed, and the people who let that down get spun out. But it's a lot easier if you're attracting the right people in the first place.
Definitely. And I actually had a note here about values and how important values are in the recruitment process. And I think even before you begin recruiting is how vital knowing the values, knowing who you are and knowing what those values are. And so many times when we work with organisations, and not only when we work, just I notice values wherever I go now, and it's kind of like a random question I ask people and they look at me as if I have two heads, because it's not a question that normal people ask, I guess. But I always say, oh, do you have values at your organisation? And, what are they? But so many of those values are external facing.
Yeah.
And they're not internal. They're not about who you want to be when you come to work, the people that you want to come to work every day. And I just think that is such an important part of the whole, like that whole culture cycle that you're talking about.
Yep.
That at the core of that is the values, and that's what's drawing all those good people in, because they are like-minded people. They align themselves with those values. They have, that's how they live their lives. That's who they want to aspire to be. And I think that from there on, like, you have the knowing the values to begin with, then you have the job application, and don't just list the values. Like, I see so many people list our values and I'm like, nobody knows what that means. You can rattle off 5 words, but nothing frustrates me more than when I see these are our values and I'm like, that means nothing to someone reading them. Explain who they are. So I go, yeah, that's important to me. Yes, that's exactly who I want to work for. 5 words without any explanation don't mean, or 3 words or whatever don't mean anything on a pretty picture. So I made a note that, don't just list them. And then from there comes values-based interviews. So it's not just the skill-based questions. You're interviewing people based on values, asking them about how they align with your values.
How might they reinforce this value?
Absolutely.
Or how might they use these values to deal with such and such a situation?
Yeah, and instead of going, what would you do if, we had to sell $500,000 worth of this? What would you do if you had 2 people that the interpersonal skills weren't working and they kept clashing and that was impacting the greater team? What would you do in that situation? Like, ask them values-based questions so that you can see what they're going to do in that environment, not just skill-based, and open up that emotional awareness side of understanding. And then and from there, those values become the framework in which they can do their job, manage their teams, do performance appraisals, and hold people accountable. Like, it's just that whole circle of how, and when that's working, that's how we spit the people out the side that we don't want that aren't going to align, and we keep those really people that are aligning with our culture coming and attracting to the middle.
You're going to lose some people. Make sure you lose the ones you want to lose. But going back to that whole thing about values and skill, and it's you recruit character and you train skill, and that works. But the opposite is much harder. And I literally, right before we got onto this recording, had a conversation with a client that I really respect, and she's a regular listener, so I won't name her. She knows who she is. And she told me about a recent appointment in their workplace. And that person, she said, look, they're probably values aligned. They're probably a great fit for our culture. They're just not as quick at the work as I'd like. And we unpacked that a bit. And my conversation with her was, wait there. If you had someone who was not culture aligned, who didn't live your values, the cost of that is infinite. Whereas if you've got someone who's not quite as quick at the job, the cost of that might be around 10% in productivity. And that 10% can be regained through training and through practice and through experience. So absolutely, you can't afford to not have the right skills at all. But I'm much quicker to forgive a skill deficit than I am a values or character deficit.
100% agree.
Something came up for me also in that interview around, Jane mentioned the probation period, and I wanted to tell our listeners a story about our obligation as a leader during the probation period. I was working with an organisation as COO. They we had a lady working for us who was in her probation period, and she worked as a part-time person across a number of services. And as the probation period was coming towards the end, I emailed them and asked how's the person going? Have you given her feedback? What do you feel she should pass probation? And in fact, she would like to move from her current role to a full-time permanent position that we have. How do you feel about that? And I got this flood of emails back, 5 people who said, don't give her a job. She's terrible. She shouldn't pass probation. She's bad enough as she is now, let alone if she was in this full-time role. And I went back to them and said, how many of you have had that conversation with her? And not one of them had that conversation with her, yet they wanted us to hold her accountable by not allowing her to pass probation or to get this other opportunity. And in my view, that's a massive failure of leadership. They had let that lady down by not giving her that feedback in time for her to act on it and in time for her to make positive change. Now, if they'd given that feedback and she hadn't made that positive change, then it's on her. But I actually had a really candid conversation with them and said, if she doesn't have a job because she doesn't pass probation, it's on you because you haven't had the courage to have that conversation with her, and that's not okay.
Yep. I actually had a similar situation the other day talking to someone where the a person in a role has raised concerns about a person that's approaching end of a probation period, and the lack of staff is the reason why they're perhaps swaying away from addressing some issues that need to be addressed. And it's similar but different because it's like it's those if you don't address it when it arises, it's only going to get worse. And that was my suggestion was like, you just need to flag it and just say, the problems we're having now are not going to get better. They're actually going to get worse. And keeping someone to fill a seat when they are making choices that are against values and they're making choices that don't align with the nature of the team and the way everyone would like everybody to be behaving is not going to improve without those honest conversations and the conversations around expectation of what is needed.
And I think there's 2 really critical principles here, that those problems won't get better unless they're raised. Mm-hmm. And if they've been raised and the person hasn't chosen to address them within probation, they won't get better after probation. Their technical skill might improve, but their values and character-related behaviour won't improve. And again, if you've been clear about that and helped them understand where they need to improve and given them support to do that, and they haven't done that, then it's on them. So one final thought from me, and again, this wasn't something that Jane explicitly discussed, but she said a few things about helping them make the right decisions. And for me, it really raised that word interview. Interview. Look at each other. And so often interviews become this power-based thing with an employer who's got a job and an applicant who wants it. And it becomes very one-way and there's an imbalance. And what we tend to see in those situations is people don't get a good look at each other. So I'm going to encourage our listeners, if you're doing an interview, make sure there's an equal opportunity for them to ask you challenging questions that help them make a decision about whether you're where they want to be. As nice as it is to fill the role, don't fill it with someone who's then going to get more information down the track and decide this was a bad decision, because then you're back to square one. And whatever you've invested in that person is wasted. So make your interviews interviews.
Great way to finish, I think.
It's a profound moment. I felt the pressure to come up with that after being called the lesser Thiessen, but I still think that applies, but maybe I've done something to address the balance. Thanks, Kirralea. Another episode, and I've loved it as always.
Yeah, it's been great. Really good topic today.
Talk to you all next time.